So if you don't already have Bavant Publishing open it after you created the macro and sub macros that I covered in the previous video. The next step for updating the database is to actually create the navigation form, and we used to call this a switchboard a few years ago. But steps to complete this can be found on pages AC 487 and through AC 509. Now keep in mind there is a subsection within those pages. I think it starts on page 503 maybe. 504, but I'll do a separate video for it, and it has to do with creating user interface macros, and so there will be a separate video for that. So just make sure you review everything again in the book before you begin any work, and I would go through the video just to make sure might be some little tidbit of information that I provided here that you didn't see just right in your face in the book, which sometimes can happen. So the navigation form routes the user to other forms that contain menus, but starts as all other forms created without the use of the form wizard. So we start by creating some menu-driven forms, and the first one is going to be called the forms list. So we're going to start as we do with any other form, and we're going to go to create. Well, it's coming. And when we get the menu, we're going to go to create and form design. And we're going to get the grid, and it looks just like the other grids, just a detail section. And we don't need to use any existing fields for this because we're going to be creating this form from scratch, and we're going to be creating some command buttons, just as we did the buttons on the reports. That's going to connect to the sub macros and perform some functions for us. So let's just use the button. We're going to use the button tool, and just again make sure that the use control wizards is highlighted as this one is, and then we want to use the buttons tool, and we're going to place it about right here, and then the wizard will begin. And this is going to be a command button, and we're going to choose miscellaneous as the option, and we want it to run a macro, because remember we've submitted some macros. We've created the macros, so they're now in place. So we want it to run a macro, and click next. And we want to choose the macro / sub macro combination we want it to run. You see here it has all the macros and sub macros that are in this database. So it has forms and reports as the macro, but we want to choose a part of the forms and reports. We want this first button to open the customer master form. So we scroll down until we see the open customer master form, and then click next. And we want it to have text, and we want the text to say open customer master form. So that is the actual text that will appear on the button. And then we're going to click next. And for the command button, because this is going to be encoded in a macro, and so it's going to be encoding language, we want it to have the same title, but we have to use underscores to represent the spaces. So open customer master, and you see I have underscores between the words instead of the spaces. So we do that, and then we click the finish button, and now you have your button. And so now we need to create 2 more buttons, and the buttons are going to be to open the book rep master form and to open the rep seminar data. So let's create those, and I'm going to place these fairly evenly apart, and we're going to make it miscellaneous. We're going to run a macro. Next, we're going to choose, this one is supposed to be open book rep master form, so you want to go to forms and reports, open book rep master form. Next, we want the text to say open book rep master form. And next, and the name of the button is open book rep master. Oh, I forgot the underscores. Open underscore book underscore rep underscore master underscore form. And finish. And let's do the last of these buttons. Open seminar rep master form. And so the miscellaneous, run macro, and this one's going to be open rep seminar data. So you want to find that macro, there it is, and we want it to read open rep seminar data. And next, and we're going to name the button the same as the text, open rep seminar data, with the underscores between each word, and finish. Alright, so now we have 3 buttons, but they don't look the same size, so I'm going to select all 3 of those just by doing this, and I'm going to go to the Arrange tab and the space and size, and I'm going to say fit to widest so that they're all the same size. And these seem to be spread out about the same distance apart. So I'm going to leave those just as they are. And now these are finished. And let's look at it in, we have to name the form. So before we finish, we want to name this form Forms List. Actually, I believe they had you, oh no, they have you do it here. Okay, so we're going to save that as Forms List. Now let's just look at it in Forms View and test it. And it worked, and we're going to close that one. Let's check the next one. And I really encourage you to always check these things when you create them to make sure they're really working. Oftentimes I get the databases and it's time to be graded, and a simple click will show me that they're not working as they should. So this seems to be working fine. And you know, this takes a while to populate because it's updating the charts on the second tab there. So let's just wait for it to finish digesting all of that information before we close the form. I don't want to give it too many things to think about at one time. Alright, so we've saved it and tested each button. They all seem to work fine. We're going to close this form. Alright, so now let's create the second menu-driven form. Directions for it begins on page 492, I think. And we're going to create this form just like we did the others using the form design. This one is going to have what we call an option group or radio buttons that you probably are very used to. They just allow the user to select only one item from the collection of items available. And so you'll see that oftentimes in a survey where they want you to only choose one item, and if they want you to choose more than one, they'll usually give a checkbox so you can check all that apply. But we're going to start this the same way we would any other. We're going to have form design, and of course there's the plain detail section. There's no need, we're not adding any existing fields. We're going to add the options group. Again, and that's one of the tools, and it has a control wizard that's attached to it. So just make sure that this is turned on as it should be, and you'll see that that's fine. And the tool for option group is right here. We're going to choose it, and then we're going to place it about right here. And it's going to bring up the wizard, and it's going to then allow us to enter the options that we want to have available for this particular form. So the first one, and the directions for this are on page AC 493. So the first one is to preview book rep master list, and then you can arrow down and put in the second one, preview customer financial report. The next one, preview discount report. The next one, export book rep master list. The next one, export customer financial report. And then the last one, export discount report. And that has 6 options now that we're going to add to this form. And is there going to be a default? No, we don't want any default. We want to be able to choose any one we want. And then we're going to choose no and go to next. And then we're going to verify that the options we want. So for option, the first option we have preview book rep master 1. It's going to be assigned option 1, and then the second one option 2, and so on until we get to option 6, which is the export discount report option. And so that's fine. So we're going to click next, and we're going to choose option buttons, and we're going to leave this as it is, as etched as the default type, and click next. And for this frame, we're going to name this frame because these buttons are going to be enclosed in a frame, and then we'll be able to apply some macros and events to the frame itself so that all the buttons operate in the same way. So we're going to name this frame report actions and finish it. And then you'll see your option buttons come up. And then let's save this form. We're going to name this form reports list. So I want to show you that this form currently does not work because we have put in these titles, but we have not associated any macros with it. You remember on the forms list form that when we made the command buttons, we associated them with macros, so they worked exactly as they should. But let me show you how they don't work now, and then we'll talk about how we're going to make them work, and then I'll show you that again. So let's look at this in form view, and you notice that I click on them but nothing happens. It just lets me click on them. Okay, alright, so let's talk a little bit about this frame, and what's going to support this is what's called the if statement. We've talked about this before, and basically if says look at this condition, if this condition is true, do this, otherwise or else do this. And so this end if is going to work this way. I mean, this if statement is still going to work this way. It's going to say if you choose item 1, preview this report. Otherwise, check to see if it's item 2 and preview that report. Otherwise, check to see if it's radio button 3. Otherwise, show that report, and so on till you get to number 6, where it says where it ends. That ends the if statement. So while this is selected, and we have it selected, you see the gold border around it as we always would. Let's open the property sheet, and let's first name this frame because right now it is named frame 0, and we're going to name this form options, and we're going to create then a macro, an event that supports the form options. So because we're going to use that in the coding, we have to first name this frame. All right, so we named it form options, and we then want to look at the after update property, and we're going to build the event that's going to control this option. So we have to find the after update. Alright, so click the event tab and then go to after update, and then we're going to choose the build button, and when we get there we're going to choose macro builder. We want to build a macro, and this macro, first of all, we're going to name it. The first thing we're going to do is set a temp variable, and that's the very first thing we do. And we want to make sure that we get everything in and follow this as it begins on page 497. So the action catalog should be open, and there'll be several things. Everything's collapsed, but if there's anything open, you want to collapse it. We want to look at macro commands, and so here's where we found the set temporary variable, and so that's what we want to use, and it's the very first thing in the macro. I just double click it, or I could have dragged and dropped it. It works the same way. So we double click that to add it to the macro, and we want to name this optno, OPT. That just stands for option number, so we're going to name it optno, and the value for the expression is going to be the form options that we just, the field, the control we just named. So we're going to use a bracket, form underscore. You see it's already populating. We can come right down here and double click it, and it puts on the closing bracket for us, and that's exactly what we want. So that's going to be how we open the macro. And then using the items on table 8.2 on page AC 498, we're going to complete this macro as it is indicated. So we're ready now to look at the if statement. We want to do an if statement. And so we just go down to add, and we could have done it another way. We're going to if statement. So the if statement says, if the temp variables is an option number equal 1, then do something. So we have to type that language in. So we're going to say, and this is found in the book, if temp VARS exclamation point, it just means once you're in temp vars, look for this, optno equal 1. So that's saying if the option chosen, if radio button 1 is selected, then we wanted to open a macro. We wanted to run a macro. So once we can choose it over here, or we can drag and drop it. Let's drag and drop it. It works the same exact way. We wanted to run the macro, and we wanted to run preview book rep master list. That was what we chose for option 1. So we're going to go in this macro and find that macro. It's forms and reports preview book rep master list. Right there. And once we get it, that's all we need to add to this macro. So it says here, if this is true and number 1 is chosen, then run this macro. Otherwise, we wanted to do something else. So we don't want to end the if. We want to add another, we want to add an else statement. So we want to add another else statement. And so here we click add else. And then if this not number 1, then we want to set another condition. So the else statement is going to be else if temp vals equal optno number 2, run that macro. So let's put that in. You have to be very careful to type these exactly as they appear. This is not right. Let me undo this. We're adding an else statement. Oh. Else if. We should have added an else if statement. Alright, so else if temp var, you see it populates all by itself. Close that. If it equals 2, then we want to run the macro, and we can either drag and drop this over here, or we can choose it from this list. So let's just find it in the list. Run the macro, and we want the macro to be, according to the table, forms and reports, preview customer financial report. So let's just find it. And that's all for it. Then we're going to add another add else if. And for this one, we're going to do the next option. So I'm just going to type these in. Temp vars, exclamation point, opno, equal 3. So if it's option number 3, run the macro. For option number 3, the macro is preview discount report. So let's find that one. All right, let's add another add else if statement. This will be for the 4th radio button. We should have copied and pasted this so we wouldn't have to type it every time, but it's okay. All right, so for option number 4, then we want to run the macro for it to export. And this one is actually export book rep master list. So let's find that in the list. I'm going to close some of these so we can see everything. Okay, and so that's all we have here. So we're going to add another add else if statement for option 5. Alright, so option 5 was to export customer financial report. We'll close another one of these. We have plenty of room to see everything. So we're going to run the macro. The macro is to export the financial customer report. And that one's done. So let's add the last one. This is option 6, and the only difference is with option 6, we're not going to add any more else if statements. That's going to end the action, and so we're going to run the macro, and for this one, we're exporting the discount report, and that is it. We're going to finish all of those. As I said, you don't click the add else if statement with the last one because it actually ends the argument for this macro. And the only thing we have to do now is remove the temporary variable because we have this, we set a temporary variable. So now we have to remove a temporary variable. And this is an option that is an argument, part of an argument, and it's in a database object. Actually, I think it's in a macro command. So you can drag and drop it, or you can just type it. But we're just going to drag and drop it right here. And it's going to ask you for, okay, so you want me to close it, you want me to remove it, but which one? Well, we named it opno, so you're going to name it opno. So you want it to run, and then you want it to stop running. That's what this does. And so now we want to save it, and we're going to test it to make sure it's working. Alright, so there's an error, and it tells me that I had a typo for option number 2. It looks like I used the uppercase symbol instead of the bracket. I used the curly bracket. So let me go in and fix that. And now let's save again, and it looks like it accepted all of my other keystrokes, and so that looks fine now. And you see it has named it from the reports list, the form options. This is an event at the after update property, and that's what we wanted to do. So now we're going to close that. And so this is set for the frame, and now we need to test each one of the buttons. Let me close the property sheet. Oh, let me show you something on the property sheet while I closed it too quickly. Notice now the after update shows an embedded macro. So if you find you have a problem, you can always go back to the event tab in the property sheet, go to embedded macro, and if you go here and click the build button, it'll open the macro for you so you can make any edits you need to make. Alright, so let's close the property sheet, and actually let's test this to make sure it's working. So this says, if I click this one, wow, it's not working. That one's working. Alright, so I got a message that says the page width is greater than the paper. Do I want to still see it? Yes. and it's going to show me it. What it just gave me a print preview view of it. There's a discount report, and now we're going to get a dialog box. So these appear to be working, but I always test them all to make sure they're working, because these are going to support another part of this assignment. And so that does it for this particular video. I hope you're keeping up with this fine. Thanks.